Hello, everybody. Good morning. My name is Mr. McCabe. I'm the head speech and debate coach at LaSalle, and before I became the head coach, I was our head policy coach for 5 years. This round is going to be slightly modified. There's only going to be half the speech time so that we can start the tournament on time. So the constructives will be 4 minutes and the rebuttals will be 2.5 minutes. After the round, I'll give a brief reason for decision and kind of how I came to that so that we can all kind of see a judge's thought process. And then I will, if you'd like, email you my flow. So after the round, you can just type in your email and I'll send that out if you're interested in seeing what a proper flow looks like and how a judge kind of lines up arguments on the flow.
Yes,
so,
I would like to.
Great. So everybody enjoy the debate.
Yeah, we should probably start the camera on.
It's on. It's been running since you got in.
Okay.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Awesome.
Okay.
All right. Got my phone. Phone security. I'm not gonna spend. Okay. Everyone good?
1 second. All right. 4 minutes.
Okay, contention one is inherency. The status quo fails. Trump's STEM education initiative is insufficient. Federal investment must increase significantly to create comprehensive STEM education programs, as Eric Hand 17. Trump signed a memorandum to ramp up STEM education, but to believe Trump gives a damn, it requires disregard of how the White House screwed education efforts in the past. The Trump budget calls for the elimination of NASA Education Office and a cut to NSF. The 0 staff members dedicated to STEM stacked against the efforts to strip the nation of science efforts. There's no reason to believe the administration undergone change of heart. Thus, the plan, the United States federal government should substantially increase its funding of elementary and secondary science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education in the United States. In contention to cybersecurity, the U.S. critical infrastructure will be uniquely vulnerable to devastating cyber attack. The only way to protect vulnerable critical systems is to train a new generation of workers that can improvise a new security solution. That's no assassin 17. Air driving has been it's wishful thinking. Organizations must move beyond air driving to identify vulnerabilities to improve security. There is no separation tools that enable to rely on connection to IT and OT activity. It's a misperception that securing OT networks means protecting STATA. ICS combine IT to STATA networks. Layers are connected and critical to control by a corporate IT infrastructure. Stuntnets penetrate an IT network to address critical OT infrastructure. Air gaps can be breached when connectivity is left vulnerable. Effectively securing converged environment hinges on bringing on the right people. When professionals understand OT details, they glean information that others can't, and identify constraints and help organizations safely live on IT-OT harmony. Addressing relationship between OT and IT, avoiding false pretenses and common mistakes, embracing innovation expertise can make STATA security a reality. And improving STEM education is necessary to establish a sustainable pipeline of workers into the cybersecurity field that ensures technicians have the necessary skills to secure critical systems like KL-12. Americans will have to be trained to use the devices effectively and safely. STEM are the foundation of cyber technologies. These positions' responsibilities can be obtained through technical schools. One of the critical elements of cybersecurity is people. The discussion of cyber education takes place at 2 levels: the pipeline, the direct channels that will ensure a trained workforce. The ecosystem, general cyber education will result in a productive high-tech workforce. And the federal government must consider measures to improve STEM education and increase the number of engineers. And these and other STEM areas are foundations of cyber. And the pipeline ecosystem need to be approved, prepare the U.S. Integrating cyber education in primary and secondary may have benefits. The introduction at a young age may lead to individuals pursuing cyber. This will increase the size and interest, ensuring a strong ecosystem and supply the pipeline into the U.S. workforce. And the risk of attacks on critical systems and industrial espionage is increasing now. That's Ackerman 15. New capabilities on cyber monitors target government and other vulnerable sites. Malware and critical infrastructure might be vanguard of a massive cyber attack. The biggest concern is data systems. There are backdoors in industrial control systems. Code is used to physically damage hardware. The threat from nation states, China, Russia, and Iran. Critical infrastructure offers potential for devastating attack. Energy is a tempting target. Every element has become a target, and it's about intellectual property and corporate strategies. Rogue nation states and terrorist groups have less to lose and interested in affecting society in a devastating way. And cyber attacks on STATA collapse the grid, as Palmer 14. A critical substation that they got taken out could lead to widespread failures. An attack on just 9 could lead to coast-to-coast blackouts. The fear is the hacker to disrupt the grid by taking STATA. The NRC worried that a well-coordinated attack on the grid could deny power for months. Cascading failures in the grid, the output has to be equal to use at all times. If the grid is running at capacity, it could be hard to prevent cascading failures. And blackouts go nuclear, as Andres Brees 11. And DoD is unable to provide bases with electricity. Grid is offline. Critical to strategic awareness demand authorities are dependent on the grid, which is vulnerable. Neither the grid nor backup power gives reliability, and the global military operations would be seriously compromised, blinding an opponent to escalate to nuclear war. Renewable facilities will not island the vast majority of bases marked at bases. In Intention 3 is solvency. The plan works. The federal funding is key as a catalyst for improved STEM education at all levels, as King 17. The states struggle to find STEM education. Federal investment is vital. When the government invests in STEM, funds that may impact far beyond the dollars themselves. Federal funds are the catalyst. Federal funds, okay. Marked at federal funds.
Okay. Wait for cross-items.
Let me take a drink of water.
Okay. Okay, good.
Yeah, good.
Great. Process can be through this as well. So, when a blackout happens, why does it cause nuclear conflict?
Well, essentially, so all the military bases, they rely on they rely on these grids, and when there's a total blackout, the country would send a panic. Of course, a country's, if all their military bases go to blackout, they'll panic. They'll think there's a direct attack on them, and they must take the initiative to destroy the country that's attacking them.
But like, why does that mean that we will like launch nuclear weapons? Isn't there like another like sort of like safety protocol if a blackout happens?
Well, our evidence says is that a total blackout specifically just completely takes out military bases.
Mm-hmm.
So. If the evidence says that the military bases will go into panic and the country will go into panic, the person certainly recognizes that there really is no safety protocol to ensure because we already have systems in place, but our evidence says that STATA will be vulnerable in the future. We need a sustainable pipeline of workers. So if that protection is destroyed, then the grid takeout will completely remove power from all military bases and cause an escalation of conflict.
Okay. So there have been like a lot of data breaches in companies. There have been cyber attacks that have stolen information. Why is like there going to be a unique cyber attack that's going to cause a total grid collapse soon that we need to solve for, and why hasn't that happened already?
So of course there's thousands of cyber attacks every day. However, right now we have our evidence says that STATA right now is safe, but we need a sustainable pipeline of workers, and our plan creates a sustainable pipeline of workers to ensure that STATA isn't left vulnerable. And our evidence says that a well-coordinated attack, or basically a rogue nation attack, to lead to the entire collapse of the STATA.
Just to clarify, what does STATA stand for?
STATA stands for
Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so what does that mean?
Necessarily, Tian.
It's like the thing that allows companies to like supervise things like nuclear power plants and stuff. Why does that connect to the military base? Like it's like companies use it to like review their like water pumps and stuff. It's like infrastructure. Why is that?
So our evidence says is that there's actually vulnerabilities because even though like there's air gapping and such, we're actually all interconnected. So an attack on those bases to lead to military power failures because we're all essentially connected.
Okay. And why does increasing STEM funding mean that we can have enough professionals that will resolve these security issues if we don't have enough already?
Wait, what do you mean?
Like why is the status quo not sufficient? So
if you look at it, so Trump right now is defunded. You want to take prep to?
No, it's fine. All right. Actually, you can finish the question.
Okay, so right now, if you look at Hurricane 17 card, so Trump is defending, so the status quo right now fails. So essentially, funding on STEM is basically inefficient. So the federal government must significantly increase the funding to STEM to resolve these problems.
Thanks.
School order, and then inherency, and then cybersecurity.
School, inherency.
All right, is everyone good? All right. First off is the state's counterplan. The 50 state governments and all relevant sub-federal territories should substantially increase their funding of elementary and secondary science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education in the United States. State action solves the gap. It spurs decentralized innovation and a race to the top. Errors 14. 51 state school boards are better than a single federal office. Competitive federalism encourages innovation, allows movement between jurisdictions. National uniformity runs counter to competitive federalism. Officials will dismantle what reigns of state and local decision-making. Federalism allows policies better mismatch the needs and preferences of voters. Competitive federalism allows experimentation by alternative jurisdictions. This is why it is called the laboratory democracy. This is what brought Massachusetts, Indiana, California, and other states that have outstanding curriculum standards. The rivalry that takes place under competitive federalism will go back to work to the benefit of everyone who wants to have the freedom that are protected by the Constitution and system of federalism. Next off is the federalism dissad. The plan destroys federalism. Robert 17. The era offers reformers opportunities. The most significant are in education, where the federal government has aggrandized its power. This comes at the expense of our understanding of shared power. How fitting that this Texas take the lead in the policy area where revitalized state power is needed the most. Education states must seize the field of education policy, exercising their own power with bold policy initiatives. States can be at the forefront of policy innovation. There cannot be more at stake. The civic health of the American public, the long-standing view that states will lead, hangs in the balance. That makes the U.S. uniquely vulnerable to a nuclear terrorist attack. Meyer 16. The terror threat is higher than ever. With the collapse of ISIS's dominance, foreign fighters are coming back. The reemergence of Al-Qaeda, the FBI's grossly outmanned and centralized entity is ill-equipped to fight a decentralized enemy. The only way to evolve our national security apparatus is by decentralizing to local law enforcement. HUMINT being done by local law enforcement is vital. Local enforcement possesses the skill and legal framework to monitor, surveil, and go undercover. HUMINT will give access undermined by encryption. Trust in law enforcement we must build. The risk of a nuclear attack is high. A retaliation ensures escalation and nuclear war. Patterson 16. Of all the threats, what most haunts security community, a nuclear attack by ISIS. This existential danger drives America's efforts. ISIS is scoring Iraq for nuclear materials. Terrorists have several openings, acquiring or fabricating a weapon, a dirty bomb, attacking reactor. They can steal weapons or materials, buy them, or recruit scientists. This is far from academic. Nuclear weapons can be smuggled through reports that Americans fighting with ISIS have been able to return. A nuclear event in a U.S. city could kill 500,000, cost trillions. An event will be economically, politically, and psychologically devastating. Add Trump's musings by using nuclear weapons against ISIS. The effect is mushroom cloud of ignorance. Now on to inherency. The act literally happened. The education department just diverted $200 million to STEM education, and private companies are adding another $300 million. The evidence details no bright line for how much funding is necessary, so you should assume that the status quo is sufficient and defund neg on any risk of a link to the dissad. Now the cybersecurity advantage. Impact double-blind. Either A, the impact will never happen, or B, they can't solve in time. SCADA systems are inherently insecure, and non-government backdoors outweigh. Williamson 14. SCADA systems were never built to be secure. IT professionals routinely inserted backdoors. These backdoors became portals for outside of the vulnerability that is well known as SCADA exploit toolbox currently offered for sale on the internet. Consolidates all known SCADA exploits. You don't need to be an expert. No link between increases in STEM education and a larger workforce. Empirics prove. Smith 17. The proportion of students studying STEM at a university remains stable. Compulsory school science has had little impact on throughput, and subsequently the number of graduates available to undertake high-skilled work. As more science in schools is expected to translate to more highly skilled STEM workers, but few students continue to advance studying career. There's a tension when a shortage claims are found on insufficient evidence and poor data. No risk of cyber war. Valeriano 14. We find little actual evidence of cyber conflict disputes limited to denial of service. Restraint is a better explanation than escalating cyber conflict. States will not risk war with cyber capabilities because there are clear consequences. A rival will not blatantly attack because that state may respond. Also, the fear of collateral damage may prevent cyber conflict. States fear the escalation in the absence of territory invasion. Too many all causes to the grid. Chan 15. Adversaries take advantage of basic lapses in IT such as firewalls and shooting systems and weak password practices. Lapses in physical security may leave backdoors open as utilities adopt digital tech and inside substation. New avenues for disruptions emerge. Digitization, lack controls, and flawed devices have made attacking the grid exponentially easier. Solvency double-blind. Either A, the threats to the grid are like EMPs, which shuts down all electronics and can't be stopped regardless of the plan, or B, redundancies in the grid solved now.
Pro 6.
Alright, so that last part you wrote was an analytic, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So also on the states, this is a small clarification question: is your plan uniform? Like, are all the states are going to go together and just like
well, the states will implement the app. They can probably do whatever they want, like within, like after they implement STEM education or like increase funding.
More on the states. So how is the U.S. uniquely very vulnerable to terrorist attacks?
Sure. So I think this is the Meyer evidence is really good, and this talks about how like with the collapse of ISIS dominance, foreign fighters are like coming back, and they're like coming back to the U.S. and like there's like a reemergence of Al-Qaeda, etc. And like the FBI is like, oh man, like the centralized entity isn't well equipped to like fight these like a decentralized enemy, right? Because like there isn't like one single entity of ISIS like that's I guess like dominant in the United States.
All right, cool. Your specific team evidence. Let's see. You talked about like there's not enough teachers in the workforce, right?
No, that's not the argument. The argument that Smith is making is that increases in STEM education don't lead to like a larger workforce, right? So like it's talking about how like empirically when we like increase STEM education, the rates of people going to STEM have still remained the same.
All right, so is there value in 14 chart assume the escalation of like a total grid takeout basically on this data?
Well, the Valeriano 14 evidence is talking about how like cyber conflict will not escalate, right? So like talk about how like states won't risk cyber war because like there are other consequences like to cyber war that they obviously wouldn't want to have to deal with.
So about your Chan 15 card, there's like too many alt causes to the grid.
Yeah.
Like, how do we know they're not handled today?
Well, I think it was written in 2015. So like as of 2015, there are these kinds of lapses in the grid, such as misconfiguration of firewalls, like bad passwords, like etc.
All right, and what was more about your self-esteem double bind? You said like grid are vulnerable to EMP, so like a person's gonna go to like a grid and just like send EMP signals at them.
Sure. So the argument is that either like the threats that you say to the grids are like EMPs, which will shut down all electronics and can't be stopped regardless of the plan, or any kind of redundancy that is happening within the grid now will solve any impact that you have to the grid.
So your Hirsch, more about your Hirsch tank card. Basically, they critique like this cartoonish view that a hacker's gonna like press a button and like the grid is gonna be taken out, but that's not how simple it is. Like how does that really kind of apply to our contention?
I'm
your Hirsch 10 evidence.
I mean, the argument is that just that like security measures aren't going to be sufficient to stop CyberProtect if the CyberProtect is capable of shutting down the entire grid. And if it isn't, and security does work, then that means that the status quo stalls because there are like measures in place that prevent like a low-level attack.
Okay, so can you explain your Ever 14 part about how like decentralized innovation like is better?
Yeah, sure. So everybody talks about how like policies implemented at like the local level, like at 50 states, is going to be better than a single federal office. So like the federal government like doesn't know what like states what the situation is, so they won't know what the states need to implement to have a like successful education policy.
The order will be case, and then states and fed.
Case in order to
Yes. In response to their, actually, in response to the one in C. Is everyone ready? Okay. First, their inherency argument is not relevant. 500 million isn't enough. Trump is still coming STEM like the NASA education and NSFL, that's acronyms. No double bind. SCADA systems are secure now, but air gapping will soon be insufficient. That's coincident. Effective STEM education funded by the plan creates workers with skills to secure these critical systems. And then yes, link between funding and workforce. With funding for STEM, technical schools can provide a pipeline in which students can connect to the workforce. This ensures jobs in the trained workforce, as well as increasing the general environment for productivity and for cyber education, resulting in more people with high-tech skills. And then yes, cyber war. Probability of industrial espionage and attacks on critical systems is high now and only increasing. The advanced capability of technology allows countries to execute attacks that can be traced back, even if their defense is correct. China, Iran, and Russia and terrorists are not reliably rational actors, so it's better to be prepared for anything rather than presume security. The U.S. as a target and a cyber war would be devastating, causing the collapse of the whole grid. This hinders the DoD in blinding them, which results in the nuclear war. And then no all causes. In response to no all causes, there are no other all causes. The evidence is specific to the SCADA system's collapse, and the security now is insufficient, but won't be soon. And then no solvency bind. The Hirsch evidence is not recent, and technology has increased. Their evidence assumes a grid that has several sections and layers, but this is no longer true. All systems are interconnected on one grid, and an attack will cause a chain collapse. And then going on to states. Perm to both. Extend the King 17 card from the 1AC and the federal funding. Oh, never mind. But states alone fail for cybersecurity K-12. One of the challenges facing into local governments is the inability to attract and retain competent individuals. States will continue to face the taller shortfalls and won't be reliable to attract cyber talent can no longer be able to find because of fiscal realities. And then the counterplan links to net benefit. The federal government oversees post-grant states sustainability plans by law, blunt 17. By law, states must require sub-grant applicants to plan a preliminary plan for how their programs will continue to operate once the once grant funding ends. Protocol call for the officials and states as applicants to sustainability plans and how states monitor implementation. 42 states required subsequently to provide a written sustainability plan. And then on to federalism. Now the federalism this sad. So on the impact level, case outweighs in terms of dissent. For cyber attacks outweigh on probability. Our academic evidence says various cyber attack actors have the motivation and capability to detect the goods when it's vulnerable. And our Cohen-Sisson evidence says that terrorists will choose a cyber attack over the nuclear terrorists because it nuclear attacks because it only requires way less operational competency and the defenses for are less weaker. And then second, no risk of nuclear terrorism. Nuclear execution is impossible. There are multiple barriers in place will not prevent it, like the system safeguards in the nuclear plants and the stigma nation states that agents receive. Terrorists can't build their own weapons because they don't have the necessary knowledge and materials. On the nuclear level, first, Trump executive orders on things like immigration, secretary surveillance, and climate change is massively change the amount of automatic states have in these areas. And federal activity is inevitable. Areas of control are constantly being negotiated. Such as new forfeiture and marijuana policies also kill federalism in the status quo. And then second, no child left behind empirically proves the resilience of state autonomy. Curtin 15. States have found ways to assert their power over the federalism of the education policy due to the NCLB. They decided to expand to reach the federal education policy. The states remain the predominant force in primary and secondary for education. Exercise autonomy is run up because of administrative and political obstacles. If the federal government depended heavily on states and to carry out the policies, states effectively guarded the large swath of NCLB. States and local localities retain their dominant role in the education policy. On the link level, the plan establishes the baseline that increases state and innovation authority of Robinson 15. The state and control has to diminish the local control, escalates education location the problem while empowering beneficial and collaborative aspects. States have limiting control locally has to their administration of education. The absence of federal intervention to increase the disparities and capacities leave the states with the ability to offer the citizen education. Responsibility will expand state and local control of education. Enhanced capability will empower the states, and the distribution of states will access the coexistent and complementary as laboratories of reform. Open process. Give me a second. Okay, I'm good.
Alright. On the state's counterplan, you said permutation do both. What's a permutation?
A permutation is a way to include both the plan and the counter plan.
Okay, so I guess what would this permutation look like?
So basically, we would have the federal government implement it first, and with the states to follow it.
Okay, hold on.
Wait, sorry.
Okay, so both of them happen at the same time, right?
Yes.
So is this a new advocacy, or is this just a test of whether or not the counterplan competes with the affirmative, whether or not it's a relevant opportunity cost? So it's the same.
Yeah. It's a test of competition of whether the counter plan
Great.
can.
Thank you.
Okay, the blunt evidence, you said the counterplan links in that benefit. How exactly does the state's counterplan link to federalism?
Because in general, when the states are doing this, they still have to have the approval of the federal government. So this still the federal government being able to
Is this about approval for funding, or is it approval for keeping the program at all?
Both.
Is the argument that states can't fund on their own, or is it the argument that
they can't do it themselves because they have to write a plan that the government has to approve.
Okay. I guess the K evidence, how would states if they were to implement the app, how would they not be able to get people into the cybersecurity workforce?
Sorry?
If states were to implement STEM education, how would they not be able to get kids into the workforce?
Because they don't have the impact that a federal government would, and then they have shortfalls in just the economy, and they wouldn't be able to fund it either, and so the states just basically don't have the influence that the federal government would.
Okay. On the federalism side, you talk about the No Child Left Behind. Didn't that require states to abide by certain things or certain laws that they had to follow?
Yes.
So I guess how does that prove their resilience if they're telling me the federal government is telling them what to do?
Our point is that this was since the No Child Left Behind didn't trigger your impacts, then ours would not, because it's the same ideals.
Okay. The Robinson 15 evidence you read at the very end.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of baseline does the plan set?
It sets basically a precedent of how this should. Basically the plan sets, the federal government sets a outline for how the states can do it too, in a way.
Okay, so how would that increase state innovation authority?
Because the federal government has more power in this sense, and so local governments and such would innovate too.
Wait, if the federal government had more power, wouldn't the state governments have to abide by what the federal government says?
Sure.
Okay. The inherency argument, you say 500 million isn't enough. I guess what is enough? Or how much more do we need?
I mean, currently in the status quo, Trump is defunding a lot of things, so I guess perhaps trillions of dollars.
Okay. It's going to be the state's counterplan and the cyber advantage.
Come on. What's going on here still? You all good? All right. States counterplan. The counterplan is sufficient to resolve the aft. Competitive federalism makes states the laboratories of democracy and allows experimentation with education policies. That causes a race to the top and ensures the best standards, which is proven by Massachusetts, California, and a bunch of other states that have done excellent things with their standards, which is the Everest evidence. But we have to leave them alone to make their own standards and innovation because they know what's best for their individual states, which is the entire point of our argument. Now, I'm going to read this evidence that says that there are no solvency deficits because the counterplan will lead to federal follow-on, which means that they'll sort of implement a plan after the states do it, which means that they resolves all the solvency deficits they have, this is meta in 13. Reform at the state level paved the road for federal legislation in goals, ESEA, and NCLB. State reform gave governors experience with standards, created support behind vision at the federal level. This coalition was critical to ESEA. These helped develop the framework for reform and provided direction and support. Federal legislation was crafted to expand upon existing efforts. Federal policymakers draw upon state action to claim legitimacy for federal reforms, but criticize the pace of state reforms to argue federal measures were necessary. State reform enabled the federal government to expand influence by creating a state consensus upon which the federal government could piggyback. Now, I'm going to go to the line by line. The first argument was permutation do both. This does not work because it links to the net benefit of the federalism dissent, which Michael will explain in the 1R. It has the federal government implement the plan as well as the state, which means they don't have the necessary autonomy because there is still a sort of uniform baseline from the federal government, which means they can't innovate in the way that federalism requires them to do so. The next argument is that states alone will fail, but this is false because innovation is necessary. Just saying that the states don't have the resources doesn't apply because their K evidence is only talking about individual states, not all of them acting in cohesion. If they all act together, they will have the necessary resources to implement a sufficient STEM education. They say that the counterplan links to the net benefit. This is false. Their evidence just says that we need that under the counterplan, the states would need to submit plans to the federal government to make sure they're doing right. It still lets them have control over the implementation of the plan, which is the entire core question of whether or not federalism is disrupted. The only question is whether or not the states have the autonomy to do what they want with their individual states, and the counterplan lets them do that, which is why the counterplan is critical and the plan does not work because it's a sweeping federal plan, which does not allow them to have the accountability they need. Now, let's go to the cybersecurity advantage. The first argument I'm extending is the impact double bind, which is the Williamson evidence. Their SCADA impact is literally a joke and totally non-unique. All of the SCADA systems in the critical infrastructure were never built to be secure. Exploits are literally for sale on the internet, and they are hacked all the time, and it requires close to no expertise, which proves that even if security is sufficient in the status quo, there's no reason, there's literally either A, there's literally no risk, or B, if there actually is a risk, there's no reason to do anything, which is the Williamson evidence. Also, SCADA is off the grid, Sweeney in 15. I've been asked whether these are always attacks on the control systems. No, most often attacks are not direct. SCADA systems are not directly accessible from the internet. Are any of these dangers real? The answer is no. Most of the access to SCADA system is off the grid. Hackers are ineffective even if they had direct access. SCADA doesn't use encryption anyways, they can't solve. Bartman and Carson in 15. Attacks with viruses specifically targeting SCADA, even though there are proven encryption systems, overwhelming majority of SCADA systems do not use encryption methods. This presents an attack vector. Endpoints and concentrators accept data from any host, authorized or not. This is exploited in nearly every attack. Now, the next argument, the plan cannot resolve the STEM education which is the Smith evidence. There has not been a correlation in increased funding for STEM education and an increase of workers going into the field. The reason for this is because there's not enough interest, even if they can have money, and even if the programs are good, this does not equal jobs because they can't determine what kids will want to do with their lives when they grow up. They can't resolve any of this. Their only response to this was that they create a pipeline for workforce, but they never explained how they actually create that, so you should be skeptical of the ability for them to create enough workers to fill the cybersecurity pipeline. Finally, I'm going to extend the Valeriano evidence, which says that there is no risk of cyber war because there are massive structural incentives for countries to not attack each other because they know they would be retaliated against and viewed negatively in the international community. Even if there are arguments about how terrorist groups and other organizations might be correct and that they're irrational, there's no way they have the advanced resources necessary to execute a cyber attack that would collapse the entirety of the U.S. grid, which means that there is literally no risk of blackouts happening or nuclear conflict, which means that you should default to the federalism dissent every time, which Michael will explain in the 1R. Yeah, so there's no reason for any of the actors they talk about to do the plan. There's no reason the plan would resolve anything, and there's no reason why the SCADA attacks haven't happened already, which means you should default negative. All right, I'm good for cross-ex.
So could you explain your federal follow-on? one?
Yeah, so that's the meta card, which says that state reform has paved the way for federal policies. So when the federal government sees that the states are doing something that's effective, they will increase their response as well, which means that all of your arguments about why the federal government is necessary to fund STEM education sort of applies better to us because states lay the groundwork for federal response.
Are there empirical like?
Yeah, so the ESAA Act, No Child Left Behind, these acts were all paved by state action first, and then the federal government followed on.
Okay. Okay, why don't we link to?
Sorry, can you speak louder?
Oh, yeah.
Typing in everything.
Okay. So what is your Sweeney 15 card saying?
The Sweeney 15 card, is this on the case?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
so this is saying that SCADA systems are isolated from critical infrastructure. So even if an attacker were to penetrate the sort of supervisory control system for it, they can't access the hardware itself, which means that there's no risk of a blackout.
Okay. And then, so why is our like evidence all like speculation for your Brendan 15 card?
The, which card?
Your solvency double bind.
Oh, which card are you talking about?
Brendan 15, reading 15. Oh.
Did I read that? On case. So the, oh, I didn't read that card.
Oh, okay. That's good.
No worries. But your evidence is speculation, though, because it's talking about what could potentially happen as a result of an attack, but you haven't explained how the mechanism for that attack would happen yet.
Okay. Why does the mutation fail?
Because it involves the federal government, which is the entire point of our argument, which says that like sort of sweeping federal policies like disrupts state autonomy.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, so, okay, how is the counterplan card used for the federalism?
Oh, so in the world of the counterplan, this counterplan has the states innovate through education funding, which I think Michael is going to talk about in the webinar, but it means that they sort of innovate, which means that even if like the federal government is doing some things for like, even if the federal government is sort of overreaching in the status quo, in the world of the counterplan, the states have autonomy, which means that like, that's where the needs for federalism is generated, because federalism is about how the plan removes that autonomy.
Okay. And so you say that like the cyber attacks won't shut down the grid. So you're saying, wait, could you explain this argument?
Yeah, so that's, I think the Williamson card, which says that SCADA systems are inherently insecure, or is it the Valeriano card? Which card are you asking about?
The Williams.
Williams? Okay, so that's saying that SCADA systems are like, exploits are for sale on the internet. It's not hard to hack these systems at all, and even if they would happen, they've probably not triggered any impact, so there's no reason to worry.
It's just 230, right?
Yeah.
All right, yeah, the federalism dissad. All right, is everyone good?
What do you?
All right, is everyone good? Nuclear terrorism caused by collapse of state law enforcement outweighs and causes extinction. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and other terrorist groups have the motivation and resources to acquire a nuclear bomb and attack the U.S. Trump would retaliate with nuclear weapons, which causes miscalculation and escalation. That's Patterson. That outweighs one time for them. The plan immediately sets a precedent of federal intervention that undermines state law enforcement. That happens way faster than absolvency, which necessarily takes some time due to the nature of the education system. And as soon as terrorists will exploit it. To the magnitude, retaliation from Trump would obviously lead to nuclear war. That was what I just said. And that just had turned cybersecurity because a nuclear terrorist attack would destabilize the grid, ensuring shockwaves that entirely collapse. They would also cause Trump to devote resources to military bases that require them to run their electricity supplies to strain levels, causing them to become uniquely vulnerable to an attack that they haven't caused. An attack would surely try. And cyber attacks do not way. That impact was a joke. That's what Andrew explained in the TNC. They say impact events. It's wrong. They haven't read any evidence for it, right? And also doesn't assume how rogue groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda can corrupt state governments and acquire nuclear weapons. That's what I said. The overview state authority is the only thing preventing an attack in the U.S. right now. Now the uniqueness debate. They basically Trump thumbs. Well, no. One, education's key. States control funding, implementation of standards. That's how the foundation. That's the foundational issue to overall federalism. Only we have a spillover card for this area, and they don't. That's Roberts. 2, the states are being proactive now. That's also Roberts. 3, the link determines uniqueness for the question of federalism. It can swing in another direction, but we need state power to be as strong as ever as possible to avoid catastrophic nuclear terror. And 4, we control link uniqueness. The feds are deferring education. None of the thumpers they put in the 2EC are about education. Now the link debate, the plans, one size fits all intervention damages the overall balance of power between the states and the federal government and accumulates federal control at the expense of local policymakers. It's specifically true for education, where centralization is nothing but a power grab that makes school quality worse. That's Roberts. And federal funding would lead to more federal regulation. The federal government would implement funding would lead them to be more empowered in other areas, which means it's still hampers state funding. They make a link turn. There's a couple problems. 1, the plan doesn't set a baseline. It's just funding of STEM education. 2nd, across it, they said that the federal government would still have more power and require the states to do certain things. It means it doesn't increase state authority, but it actually hampers it. 3rd, the evidence is not specific to STEM. Now, I will do the rest of the link work here. Yes, spillover. Education policy is a litmus test for the overall balance of power. That's Roberts. Federal overreach. Education is comparatively the biggest threat and snowballs to embolden policymakers in other areas. This internally goes uncontested in the 2AC. And also, federalization of law enforcement prevents effective responses to terrorism. State leadership is better because it allows for effective implementation of human intelligence that builds local cooperation. All right, yeah.
Can you say like counterplan?
Also, like the counterplan provides uniqueness for the district because even if it isn't relevant now, the counterplan would give states autonomy and make the federalism decide a thing. Okay, so it's case, states, and federalism. All right, is the timer up? Okay, doing good? Okay, so no double bind. Stated systems are secure now, but air gapping will soon be sufficient. That's Cohen Sasson. Effective STEM education funded by the plan creates workers with skills to secure critical systems. And this STEM education will resolve the workforce gap. That's at their no-link argument. And the K evidence indicates that increasing STEM education will revitalize interest, massive injections of funding. And yes, cyber attacks will escalate. Their impact defense doesn't assume Stata. Ackerman indicates that the takeover of Stata will uniquely collapse the grid, prefer a nuance the internal link. And now to states. No, permutation do both. Solves best. The federal and state governments working together will ensure effective implementation of the plan, shields the link to the net benefit, because states will have the capacity to do for their own implementation and state innovation of STEM education. And the counterplan links to the net benefit. According to law, states will have submit grant applicants to the federal government and for how they continue and monitor programs once federal funding ends. That's blunt and means federal government would inevitably have to step in. And now the federalism is this stat. Now impact level. 1, cyber attacks outweigh on probability. Various cyber actors have the motivation and capability to attack the grid once it's vulnerable. That's Ackerman. Terrorists have will choose cyber attacks over nuclear attacks because it requires way less operational competency for defenses that are much weaker. That's Cohen Sasson. And 2, no risk of nuclear terrorism. Nuclear acquisition is impossible. There are multiple barriers in place that prevent it, like system safeguards and nuclear plants and stigma nation states that aid them receive. And terrorists can't build their own weapons because they don't have the necessary knowledge or materials. And their Hellman evidence doesn't make sense. It was written back in 2008 and said nuclear terrorism can happen at any time, but that means the impact is empirically denied, and you need this level 1, the double bind argument. Either empirical federalism and intervention in education, such as the NCLB, should have triggered a link, or states will inevitably have authority. NCLB proved to be a massive attempt to change an educational authority, but it proves unable to shift control of the federal government. That proves state control inevitable as Durkin. And 2, Sessions demolished federalism, asset forfeiture, and war and drug policy, as Stillman said successfully. Sessions announced that the Justice Department is going to extend asset forfeiture. A bad flaw policy, the government will be allowed to confiscate property of people suspected of crime. New policy will reinstate a program which the federal government adopts forfeiture cases initiated by the state and local law enforcement agencies. Sessions will also seek to expand federal role in the war on drugs, ramping up marijuana prostitution. Sessions' new policies amendments to federalism, equitable sharing, circumvent enabling police to profit from seizures through payments funneled through federal government. Law enforcement have incentives to prioritize that cases that net them money over objectives. Okay. Just mark that prioritize cases.
States federalism, and then cyber.
All right. We good to go? All right. Cool. Conceding federal follow-on in the 1AR is kind of problematic because it means that counterplan resolves the entire DAF without the need for the permutation. The main argument is that the permutation will link to the net benefit. They have conceded that federal authority on the link level of the state's counterplan, increasing federal intervention into this issue, especially for education, is critically important for federalism, and it means that the permutation will not resolve because it will undermine state autonomy, which is the entire basis of our solvency argument and the federalism decide. Now, the only argument is that they say working together will check executive will lead to better implementation, but we have made an argument that states have sufficient resources to do it on their own, which means that there is literally no risk. You should not take the risk of having them crush federalism in order to get maybe a slightly better implementation argument, especially considering that they conceded follow-on. Now, I'll explain the following argument first. States implementing the counterplan alone will lead to the federal government implementing a follow-on procedure later. It will not link to the federalism decide because it will be perceived as a supplement to a mainly state-led issue. But if they do the plan as well, it will be perceived as a federal-led issue, which the states are forced to comply with, which means they link to the federalism decide, which means the counterplan resolves the entire of the AFM. You should vote negative. Now the federalism decide. They have conceded on the impact level. Nuclear terrorism will cause extinction and very much quicker. They've conceded a time frame standard which says that the plan immediately sets a precedent of federal intervention, which means that the decide happens much quicker because the advantage requires them to go through the education system and educate kids, which necessarily will take a few years for them to get the cyber skills necessary to resolve the cyber impact, which means that our impact happens first and causes extinction for nuclear retaliation. They make the argument that it's not possible, but that's wrong because the terrorists have the capability and incentives to acquire precisely because of the fact that domestic law enforcement is weak and is going to be weakened in the result of the plan. They have no evidence in the context of the link, which means that we uniquely control a risk of the impact. Now, the only other argument they have is that it should have happened. It should have happened already. First of all, the counterplan provides uniqueness by increasing state autonomy. Second of all, none of these thumpers are unique because the states are leading in education the status quo, which is the Roberts evidence they still have no answer to. NCLB is not an example because the states are still given some level of authority, even if the federal government was mainly controlling it, and they have no other examples, which means that you should default negative, and the link determines the direction of uniqueness, and we've already proven that they cause a massive federal intervention. Now on the cyber page, the only argument I'm going for here is that they're not going to be able to SCADA attack should have happened already. There's no explanation in the 1AR for why there has not been an attack already. SCADA systems are inherently insecure, and they have no explanation for why if an attacker were going to attack, they have not attacked already, and they have also no explanation for why the time frame is this specific. And if there has not been if there has not been a deadly attack already, there's probably enough of an incentive for them not to attack that they would never do it in the first place, which means that the death side outweighs every time.
So the order will be case, and then states federalism.
You make sure you speak up.
Yeah, sorry.
You need to speak up. I couldn't catch half
Oh
of
yeah,
what you said.
you're good.
I heard you, but to the microphone.
Oh, right. Okay. Okay, so it's gonna be case first, and then states fed. Starting. So the grid attacks scenario outweighs in terms of all their offense, multiple reasons for quick extinction, multiple actors. The Ackerman evidence is from last year and cites Russia, China, Iran, and terrorist groups targeting the U.S. critical infrastructure and having the capabilities. And the vulnerabilities. The grid technology is outdated and the systems are vulnerable to cascading failures. A targeted cyber attack on a few substations is sufficient. That's Plumer. And then retaliation. Grid attacks that detect U.S. military control systems, radar and communications collapsing readiness, and risk of nuclear retaliation in the U.S. due to external pressures causing nuclear exchange. That's Anderson Brits. And then so the time frames are the quickest. Cyber attacks can happen instantly. The risk is high now. Prioritize time frame when evaluating the round because it makes sure that we handle the most immediate issues first, meaning fiat intervention is necessary since other factors could solve the fire risk. And so their argument on the case is that basically that it should trigger now, but like our whole argument right now, this is our cohesive evidence that like right now the SCADA systems are right now they're strong, they're fine, but like as technology increases, there's going to be more and more holes in the SCADA systems, and so what we're saying is as technology increases, it's going to be a problem, but like we need to solve that now because like extending our evidence from the one I see about how like the espionage and like risks of probability of like other countries are going to attack us is really high, and so we need to like improve our SCADA systems while we can. And then going on to states, again, just extend our perm to both, that you can do both at the same time, and that like states alone, and that like just that you can do both at the same time, and then like it's the best way to solve because they're having both the states with like I guess their like local like their local influence, and then like the government which sets like a higher influence of like a national scale. And then going on to federalism, again extend our thumpers that like this should have happened already, like the No Child Left Behind, which like the states had to like this again was like an implementation of us education policy on like the states, and like this did not trigger their impacts. And then also like on the link level that that like there's no like risk of nuclear terrorism because like it's just impossible, and there's like multiple barriers to like prevent it. And then it's just not going to happen. So basically, the case outweighs because we're like at the quickest time frame, and like how this is happening in the status quo, and the scary symptoms are strong, but they're going to be weak soon, and so we should outweigh the case.
Good debate.
Good debate.
Good debate. Good debate.
Okay, I would have voted negative in this debate, and a fairly easy decision for me. The affirmative concedes a few key arguments on both the state's counterplan flow and the federalism flow. On the state's flow, the 2AR's decision to not go for the fact that the counterplan would somehow link to the net benefit means that there is no risk, that there would be no reason that the counterplan, one, wouldn't link to the net benefit, or two, that because they don't go for a no-link argument on the disad, that the permutation would also would link to the net benefit. Therefore, it'd be pretty easy for me to evaluate the 2NR's framing of the counterplan that it resolves the entirety of the affirmative without the permutation, where there's only a risk of the net benefit. Second, on the federalism disad, a tricky or techie argument is that made by Andrew is that link controls the direction of uniqueness, which is simply just not a true argument whatsoever, but it's been conceded consistently in this debate round. It's particularly problematic because the disad has zero uniqueness set up in it, and a counterplan basically counterplanning uniqueness, one, is abusive, but two, isn't really solved by this particular counterplan. You can't say that the counterplan sets up the ability for the states to have some sort of access to federalism that doesn't exist in the SQO, that the plan would somehow not trigger, because the argument that you all should have been making from the 2AC is that the permutation shields the federal action because it provides the ability for the 50 states to still act in unison, which creates the very argument that Andrew goes for in the 2NR, i.e. that the states acting would spill up to the federal implementation, but doesn't link to the disad for, I don't know, reasons. That wasn't really explained very well in the debate. Now, obviously, a shortened policy round will have not as many warrants and explanations as a fully flushed out round is, but a few just general comments for everybody. The first affirmative, you need to have a better understanding of the 1AC, both in reading it, there's a lot of stumbles, and just from a kind of ethos perspective, it's not very persuasive when the 1A doesn't really seem to have a grasp of the affirmative, hasn't read it very much. In your cross-examinations, you wasted valuable time, specifically in the 1C, asking questions that didn't get anywhere. Your first question was, oh, that was an analytic, right? Obviously, he didn't read a card. He didn't read an author. And then your partner asked questions about cards that weren't read. So y'all aren't flowing, which is problematic and makes you look bad. Second, most of your time should have been spent on the federalism disad, for the very simple reason that the only out the negative has in this debate is the federalism disad. If they don't win the disad, the permutation wins you the debate, right? You spent very little time in cross-ex
on the federalism disad, and very little time questioning things like, why are states key to preventing nuclear terror? Why aren't things like border security and the FBI and CIA informants the key to stopping nuclear terror? How do nuclear weapons get into the United States? Where are they coming? Who exactly has the weapons? How did they get the weapons? All of these are logical questions that their 1NC evidence does not answer for them. It kind of makes speculative claims, which they're also saying is bad regarding your cyber advantage, right? So the same arguments that they're making apply to their disad. You should have been a little bit better at pointing that out, because this is literally the only offensive option they have in the debate. And you spend very little time in cross-ex. 2AC, make sure you know what a permutation is. It's a test of competition between the net benefit and the plan. I did enjoy that because this is a demonstration debate. You kind of allow a setup for if somebody's watching who doesn't know what a permutation is. That's good. Like I said, don't ask questions about arguments or evidence that they didn't read. It makes you look bad. No underviews. Underviews are silly. Put it in an overview or put it in a line by line. And don't repeat yourself in an underview. As a judge, that's just, you don't have enough to say. And make a permutation shielding argument in the 2AC. The 1NC was fine. Read some uniqueness on the federalism disad. And you probably should have conceded in the 1NR the inherency argument, being like, great, we agree, they're inherent, probably a reason why like our disad has uniqueness, and they trigger the link. If it's if the 500 million isn't substantial in the status quo, then there's no thumpers, because the plan is exponentially more than 500 million to resolve the STEM workforce gap. The 2NC, the state's counterplan overview probably could have been better embedded in the line by line. Like the solvency card that you read in the overview probably could have been an answer to 2AC number 2. And on case, you probably could have done more warrant explanation than reading those new pieces of evidence. Sure. And I would have liked to see a little more warrant interaction. Now, granted, given the time constraint, that was probably problematic, but nonetheless, you could have, I think, made some better use of that time. So overall, good debate. Hopefully, it was beneficial for everybody in the audience, and I'd be happy to send out my copy of my comments and my flows should you want them to either competitors or observers. Good luck, everybody.